Hello everyone and welcome back to Just Finish Coding. My name is Sriram and this is the fourth part of the car chase series. By the end of this video you will have the game lobby and the main game improved with the road marking and border clones. We can first start with the road marks. When the green flag is clicked, we make the sprite go to the back layer and hide. The reason we make it go all the way back is because it should be behind all of the other sprites. It should be behind the car, behind the obstacles, behind the score, behind the buttons, and so on. After this, we create a new variable for all sprites called linesCloneID. Initially, we set it to 1. I will explain what this variable is used for later on, but just leave it for the moment. Next, we create a clone. Each clone will be responsible for creating the next clone, so there is no need for a forever loop here for the clone creation. Now if you take a look at the costumes tab, you will see that the road marks are made up of multiple markers that go all over the screen. At any given point in time, 2 of these clones will be enough to continuously cover the screen. Let's move on to the main clone script. Each clone will create its own clone when it moves below the screen center. We have to make sure that only one clone is created and no more than that. To do this, we create a variable called cloneCreated for this sprite only. The reason I named it with a question mark at the end is to constantly represent that the variable is a Boolean variable and can only carry 2 values, yes and no. Initially, the clone hasn't created another clone, so we set the variable to no. We show the clone and check if the linesCloneID variable is 1. If it is, then we set the Y position of the clone to 10. If it isn't, we set the Y position to 400. After this, we repeat the main movement until the Y position of the clone is below the bottom of the screen. Therefore, we do this until the Y position is less than -328. As I mentioned earlier, the clone needs to always be in the back layer, so we add that line of code. We want the clones to move downwards, so we change Y by speed multiplied by -1. We are changing the magnitude of the Y position of the clone by speed, but the direction needs to be downwards, so we add the -1. Next, we set x to the x position of the car divided by 3, the whole multiplied by -1. The reason we say x position divided by 3 and not just x position is so that there is greater width. For every 3 pixels that the car moves, we only move road marks by 1 pixel. The reason we multiply the figure by -1 is simply relative motion. When the car moves to the left, the passengers inside the car do not feel the movement. What they see are all the things in front of them moving to the right. Similarly, in this case, the car is going to be more or less in the center, while all the other sprite clones will be mirroring it. After this, we add an if then and check if the Y position of the clone is less than -40 and clone created is no. If this is the case, we change linesCloneID by 1, create a clone, and then set clone created to yes. Alright, what is happening here? What we want is for the first clone to go to the center and every clone after that to start on top. At the start, we set linesCloneID to 1 and then create a clone. Right away, we check if linesCloneID is 1 and set the position accordingly. By the time the next clone is created, we have already changed linesCloneID. At the end of the loop, the clone will be at the bottom of the screen. There's no point building an inventory of useless clones, so we can delete them. Perfect! If you test out your program now, the road marks should be working. This gives a pretty nice illusion. It looks as if the player is racing down the road. The same features should exist in the main game. Great, let's move on to the borders sprite. The code will be quite similar, though there are some differences. When the green flag is clicked, we hide the sprite. This should be no surprise as the whole intention is to show only the clones. Now, we create a variable for all sprites called borderCloneID. This variable works the exact same way as the linesCloneID variable and helps us to distinguish between the first clone and every succeeding clone. Initially, we set border clone ID to 1 and then create a clone. This is going to be everything that we need to do within the green flag script. The next part will be the clone script. Like the road marks, each border clone will have a clone created variable for this sprite only. Initially, we set that variable to no. If you take a peek at the costumes of the border sprite, you will see that the borders are actually larger than the stage. This way, the player can only see them if he moves towards the edges. Initially, we set clone created to no. This done, we go to the back layer and show. These lines of code should be fairly self-explanatory. Here we're going to check if border clone ID is 1. If yes, then we set y to 10. If no, we set y to 443. The mechanism of the border will also be exactly like the road marks. At every point in time, there will be 2 border clones that cover the screen. With the exception of the first border clone, each clone will be created right at the top and then move downwards, thus giving the illusion of the car moving. Next, we have a repeat until y position is less than -355. This will be when the border clone is completely at the bottom. Now you may think that the minimum y position is only -180. However, this is a mistake. Since the sprite is so massive, it can cover a lot more than that. The borders will move themselves downwards by the same speed as the road marks. We change y by speed multiplied by -1. The x position will be set to x position by 3 multiplied by -1. This works the exact same way as the code in the road marks. Here we have to start creating the new clones. There are 2 conditions for this that need to check. No prior clone should have been created by the clone in question, and the clone in question should be at about the center of the screen. Thus, we check if y position is less than 0 and clone created is equal to no. Within this statement, we change border clone ID by 1 and then create a clone. We also set the clone created variable to yes. If we do not do this, new clones will keep being spawned, and that's really going to break the game. Once this repeat loop is finished, we can delete the clones. An alternative method to this multiple clone approach would be to just use 2 clones. Rather than deleting the clones at the end, we would just put them right back on top. The method would end up doing exactly as good as this way. Alright, that will be everything that we have to do for this video. If you test out the program, the road marks should work as intended, but you won't be able to see the borders. The reason is because at this particular X position of the player, the borders are to the right and left beyond the stage. In other words, it is hidden. You will be able to see the borders when you complete the car motion, which will be done in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.